Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if Poland joined the Axis. Poland and Germany had always a very complicated relationship. While nowadays the relationship is most likely the best it ever was, despite the fact that Poland is still asking for some war reparations. Both countries increased trade, opened their borders. Poles look for work, studies and opportunities in Germany, while also Germans do the same, especially German companies and businesses in Poland looking for business opportunities. Poland and Germany are both members of the NATO as well as the European Union, and despite minor political differences, a lot has been achieved by both sides and cooperation continues to exist. This wasn't always the case, especially not after World War I. After World War I, there were local border disputes between Germany and Poland, and only thanks to the complicated deals, German disarmament, and the intervention of other powers, these issues could be partially solved. Poland also had many claims on German territories, but also on territories of other neighbor states, while Germany never really accepted the loss of World War I and Prussia was cut off from the rest of Germany due to the creation of the Polish corridor. So yeah, you can see that there were many problems. Surprisingly enough, Germany-Poland signed the Non-Aggression Pact in 1934. The reasons for this could be that Germany realized that it was still too weak, too disorganized, and thus wanted to have peace on temporary terms with Poland. There were also rumors about the joint Polish-French intervention, an idea that was proposed from the Polish side, which the French rejected. This could have led to the Non-Aggression Pact between Germany and Poland. Later on, France was perceived as an unstable republic and Poland had to do something. That's why they engaged on friendlier terms with Germany. France, as a result, signed a deal with the USSR, the Anti-Comintern Pact, an alliance redirected against the Soviet Union, planned to include Poland as an ally, something that the Japanese were very keen about. Not so much the Germans. And finally, let's not forget that the Poles took advantage of the German invasion of Czechoslovakia and they took parts of nowadays Český Těšín. The Germans saw the corridor as a main problem and seeing how there was no solution and how the Germans wanted to annex Danzig or just find any excuse to declare war on Poland to start their ideological goal of Lebensraum, they then declared war on Poland. The Poles already concluded alliances with Britain and France, but it took time until both countries were involved in this war. What if all of that changed? What if Poland joined the Axis? Let's say that the Poles would not trust France, seeing how they rejected the proposed Polish-French intervention of Germany. The Poles were very anti-communist and they feared the Soviet Union. The Germans and their ideology were pretty much anti-Slavic but also anti-communist, while the French leaned closer to the left, especially under Blum. And Britain was just too far away from Eastern Europe. The Polish leadership in this alternate history would agree to be member of the Anti-Comintern Pact, because they just didn't see any other option. Poland and Germany would now not become best buddies forever, but they would agree that the Soviets were a threat to Europe and the world. The Germans and Poles would have several agreements, a highway connecting Prussia with the rest of Germany would be built. Danzig would be allowed to become German, but Germany would also in return have to drop all claims on Poland. Economic treaties would also be made. But at the same time, there would be different problems, especially within Germany, especially the more ideological circles, which would not really agree on making an alliance or a pact with Poland. But then again, the Germans also concluded a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union. They kept it for some years, and well, they of course betrayed the Soviets, but the pact was respected for some time. Lithuania would be under heavy pressure. Not only would the Germans force them to give Klaipėda or Memel away, but Lithuania would effectively become some sort of puppet state. And it's not far-fetched to claim that Latvia and Estonia would also forcefully join the Axis, and that the Germans and Poles would plan joint invasions in order to protect them from a Soviet invasion. The Germans and Poles wouldn't lose much men in these operations, and they would be done within some days or even weeks. With the additional material, equipment and manpower, the Germans would start their operation in the west much earlier, and France, the Benelux, they would still fall. This time the Germans wouldn't experience the same that would happen in our timeline, but they could take a little bit more damage because they had a little bit less experience due to the non-invasion of Poland. Britain would declare war on Germany but not on Poland. And the same logic they had with the Soviet Union in OTL would be used in this alternate timeline with Poland, because Poland was not invading France, it was Germany. Germany also invaded the Benelux, and it was not Poland. And the main priority of Britain was to get rid of Hitler, and an alliance with a communist state such as the USSR would be out of question. France too was already gone, so the only option was Poland in that case. Hungary in this timeline would also be less reluctant to join in other operations, seeing how Poland was now part of the Axis and, well, a very historical ally to the Hungarians. The Balkans would still be overrun by Axis powers, or we might see Yugoslavia actually joining the Axis due to the butterflies, but the operations in Greece would still happen due to the ambitions of Mussolini, and Italian-German forces would also fight in Africa, while most Polish, Hungarian and German forces would be either ready to attack the Soviets with the support of Romania, or patrol the Baltics and other occupied territories and countries in Eastern Europe. And here we have different outcomes I can think of. Let's say the Axis, they invade the USSR and they actually win. What will happen next? The Poles will be given several territories, but the problem is that the Ukrainians and Belarusians, they wouldn't enjoy Polish rule, and perhaps even parts of Lithuania would go to Poland, which the Lithuanians wouldn't enjoy neither. The Polish army would be tired after fighting the Soviets. The local population, while happy about the victory, would still dislike the fact that Poland was in an alliance with Germany, and Poland would slowly but surely be transformed into a satellite state of Germany. The worst case scenario in this outcome is that the Poles, like the Slovaks, they could rebel against their government and they could become independent again, but the German Wehrmacht would then come in and crush the rebellion immediately, and the Polish state would cease to exist and be carved up between the Germans, Lithuanians, Ukrainians most likely as well. And the Soviet Union would already be gone, and Britain wouldn't be able to do much. This means that Poland would cease to exist under such conditions. Another outcome is that the Axis is still unsuccessful in their invasion. The US invades as well, and the Soviets will severely punish the Polish state and the Poles. While Britain will have some sympathies for Poland left, and it may actually mean that Poland could still have some type of independence, it is possible that in this alternate timeline, Poland may first of all be much smaller and face more hostility from their socialist brothers. The best outcome for Poland joining the Axis is that the US still invades and reaches the shore of France, and Britain would be able to convince Poland to switch sides. Now, this would be very interesting. While Poland would be big enough and take the Germans a bit by surprise, it would take them some time to beat the Germans up. But World War II could be finished a bit earlier on, and the European continent would then be free from Nazi rule, with the US, UK, France and Poland becoming the victorious powers. Poland would even have the potential to lead a small bloc of their own, the Międzymorze, finally accomplishing the dream of Piłsudski. And let's not forget that the Soviets were still beaten in this part of the alternate timeline by the Axis powers. So Poland would, under such circumstances, become a great power. Chances are that it could even overshadow Britain and France, especially in the decades to come. But it would not be able, nor be even interested to fight against the US. Instead, we could see a lot more hostility from France against Poland, and fears from British side that Poland would become too powerful, while the US would probably remain somewhat distanced and focus their eyes on China, where Mao would still be able to win in this alternate timeline. Most outcomes for Poland joining the Axis would be negative and alienate them from the rest of the world. Thus, it is understandable why Poland didn't join the Axis. In the worst case scenario, it could even be totally wiped off from the map. But if they were able to backstab the Germans in the very opportune moment, and if Britain would use the same logic as they did with the USSR in our timeline, with no USSR and guarantees from the Allies, such a Poland would become the strongest power within Europe. This Poland would also have accomplished everything that Piłsudski could have asked for. Not only was Russia totally divided, no, there was also the Międzymorze, where Poland had finally control over different countries from the Baltics to the Black Sea. And Germany too would be beaten. Thus, this Poland would not face any danger whatsoever from Germany and Russia. And that's where we leave it for now. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.